Good people, dual chamber cases are pretty exciting. You can hide that power supply at the back. You can explore the full height in the main chamber. Visuals, of course, are a priority because of that beautiful side tempered glass angle. You can explore multiple GPU orientations, and you can showcase everyone how much money you spent on fans, which is very likely more than the case itself. So the question is, which fish tank is right for you? The prices of course vary, and I can see how the Hyte, the NZXT, and the Lian Li are so popular because of that mid 150s target. The new Thermaltake is all about size and that upright GPU mount, with the NV7 and the new O11 XL going beyond 200 to clearly cater to a different audience. So I gotta start with something simple and effective, the NZXT H9. You guys seem to love it based on reviews, and I can see why. Despite getting flack for being like the copycat of the O11, this thing has a mind of its own. There is simply no denying how clean this case looks, with all mesh top and side panels with proper high airflow dust filters on all the intakes. The light colored TG fits super well for that dual chamber showcase with an almost seamless angle because there's no support line there. I really like the framing and the slight indentation of your motherboard, very similar to the NV7 but less fancy. What we do have though is a window in this cable management cover to protect those cables entering into the side area, which by the way can only support 120mm fans, but on a nice removable bracket for push-pull, no problem. The Flow model comes with 4 fans, which is actually surprising at this price point, and they're decent airflow fans to get you started out of the box. But of course they had to cheap out on some areas, so like there's no thumb screws on the PCI area, just regular screws. The bottom panel for airflow is great, you can do a 360 there, no problem, but it's not a panel that is removable, so installation becomes difficult. And for the 4 fans that are included, there's not a single splitter included nor a fan hub on the case, so make sure that your motherboard can house all of them. But to be honest, I am nitpicking here because this case is an absolute pleasure to work with. Honestly, the assembly here was absolutely straightforward. The top panel is removable for easy installation of the radiator. This stuff is already pre-installed, although we don't have an extension cable included for all the fans, so we just have 4 3-pin fan headers for our fans, so not ideal. But this is actually the first time I'm routing all the cables separately. The power supply is still out, but this way I can just route everything cleanly and install the power supply at the back. So swing over the SSD caddy, here we have our power supply, and now I can just plug everything back in and the system is going to be ready. This is a really smart way of actually working with dual chambers, just because we have all this space, so you can route all the cables first and then deal with the power supply later. Now the thing is, you cannot relocate the PSU, but with a few cable ties, this back section is super clean, and so is the front. I know we love to give NZXT a hard time for the lack of innovation on some fronts, but this is absolutely hands down one of my favorite dual chamber experiences and enclosures. Solid recommendation, okay? But let's be real, the MVP of the dual chamber configuration direction right now is Lian Li O11 Dynamic Evo and the later XL, because man, they're taking on way too many boxes there that it becomes very interesting to work with because it gives you so many options. All the panels are removable. All the interior brackets for fan installation are removable. You can do 120s, you can do 140s, tons of radiator and cooling support. The case is absolutely beautiful, really high quality as well. You can do an inverse orientation, which no other case can do in this roundup. I mean, it's also one of the few cases that can properly run up to 5 different GPU configurations. We've done some testing to see which one works the best, and clearly your standard horizontal is the best performer, but there's no denying the experimentation the O11 Dynamic Evo gives you is just absolutely next level. Can't wait to see what the next evolution of this whole series brings to the table. But it's also just a reminder that all the copycats, like the H9 that we love to say, are bringing different simplicity to the mixture, because for example, if I'm not doing anything crazy water cooling, I actually prefer the H9 over the O11 Dynamic Evo, but having all the options and like even being able to relocate the IO on the Lian Li is just, it's brilliant. Perhaps the most annoying thing about the latest O11 series is that it can be slightly intimidating because of how many different configurations you can run. But just keep in mind that it's a very easy case to work in terms of cable management, in terms of removing all the fan brackets, let's say repositioning the back fan to give you a little bit of extra height clearance. Like, everything is thought out. Except when it comes to the new model that is getting slightly delayed to refine some of the motherboard tray options, because right now you cannot remove the GPU unless some force and screwdriver is involved. But the thing you have to know about the O11 Dynamic Evo XL is that it's just a slightly larger version of the already known O11 Dynamic Evo, with slightly more options for height adjustments of the motherboard tray, more room above and below the motherboard, and also 420 support. That's kind of where we're at. Shifting gears to talk about an Imposter, the Hyte Y40. It's probably the only dual chamber lookalike in here that isn't actually a dual chamber at all. It's slightly wider, yes, but you know, the power supply is in your standard bottom configuration that is slightly deceiving, because it looks like a dual chamber enclosure in your real sense, where everything is behind the motherboard tray, but they've done some really interesting tricks in there to make it look like a slightly more compact dual chamber enclosure, and I like that. Their consistency in design language is absolutely perfect. You know, all the little mesh ventilation pattern that is scattered throughout the case, the PCI slots, all the ventilation, the little design on the back panel. We have a very similar sized top and bottom chin too of the enclosure, so proportions look totally fine. Apparently it's a very popular case on Amazon, but with one major flaw. The Gen 4 riser cable looks absolutely beautiful, but that's it. You can only run your GPU in vertical orientation via the riser cable. So if you have any issues with the motherboard, you cannot install the GPU in regular horizontal mode, because the PCIe slots near the motherboard are the low profile ones. But if the system boots and you can accept a little bit of that risk, the system is absolutely gorgeous, especially with 360 at the top, a beautiful GPU on the side. It's nice. But moving from nice to absolutely gorgeous, we have the Phanteks NV7. NV because you're going to be envious of this enclosure. NV7 because it's that middle pack. The NV9 and NV5 are coming. But this is probably the best looking dual chamber enclosure. You know, the large forehead above the motherboard tray, you know, initially I was skeptical about it and I don't really like it. Now I've come around and I absolutely love that additional height look. The entire frame is beautifully engineered from a structural point of view, so you can remove both side panels from the front to give you all that access to work on the interior without compromising on anything that's might be pressing from the top, anything that might be heavy from the top panel. It's all taken care of. The motherboard tray is beautifully concealed and indented in this like overly engineered both brackets for beautiful ARGB illumination, but also some use case of like trying to hide your exiting cables. If you're using an EATX motherboard, that side bracket can be rotated for a little extension. The bottom bracket can be rotated for angled fans, which looks really good for additional fan showcase. And also, I mean, if you're using either the Phanteks fans or the Lian Li fans or the SWA fans where the blades are facing you for that beautiful, you know, all consistent fan look, it just gives you such a unique appeal and aesthetic. The case can only run 120mm fans, which is for visual consistency purposes only. I kind of agree, but also at the same time, that's why the NV9 exists, to give you room for 140mm fans in basically the same structure. And on the NV7, you can only do 140s at the bottom, but it's gonna throw off the whole aesthetic, you know? Looking at the reception and the exposure of the NV7 content versus like Lian Li stuff, the Lian Li and NZXT seem to be a lot more popular because maybe of the price point, of course, whereas the NV7 is above that $220 price point. So a little bit more expensive, a little bit more niche targeted, and you can't do everything with it. You kind of have to work within its constraints, but I would say it's still a really solid choice for those beautiful high tower configurations that still has really decent airflow, really decent radiator support, and yeah, highly recommend it too. The Phanteks CTE 750 isn't here. It's a very weird dual chamber configuration that does things a bit differently. First of all, having the motherboard in the center gives us access to the rear intake or exhaust for the GPU, which is helpful. But then we also have all this other intake, you know, from the front, from the side, from the bottom, and for the top exhaust. If you've ever wanted to see how many fans you can fit, how many fans you can play around with, this is a really interesting configuration, but a few things to keep in mind. It is fairly pricey and does come with 3 fans, but you're likely going to replace them anyway, so that's a little bit wasteful. Number 2 is that the build quality and the user experience is way different versus everything else that I've talked about in this roundup. Nothing compares to the Lian Li, nothing compares to the Phanteks stuff. Even the NZXT H9, which seems to be simplified in terms of build quality, everything feels robust, versus the CTE that has a little bit of that budget feeling, like thin sheet metal, and all the panels are properly sitting together, but there's still something slightly off. That's really my main complaint, because if you want something absolutely massive on the interior and tons of room in the back for all your cable management stuff, where you don't have to do any cable management, just stuff the cables, close the side panel, you have plenty of extra room for anything else you require. And also because everything is facing up, cable managing that side of things on the I/O becomes a little bit trickier and more difficult to access, like your motherboard area or the GPU cable. But people seem to love it from the point of view of being able to fit so many fans and like really brute force your way into proper cooling regardless of noise levels and regardless of price as well. And so my 2 favorite dual chamber cases are the NZXT H9 Flow. I was surprised at how easy the case was to build with and looks absolutely gorgeous without, you know, being too complicated. And of course, the O11 Dynamic Evo, man, what a fantastic enclosure that can do anything. Super nice to work in, high quality and affordable too. At $159, I mean, it doesn't come with fans, but it's something you can obviously and will populate anyway. If you are running a dual chamber case, let me know which one. I'm Dmitry. I'll talk to you in the next video.